We are coming to the end of our shortest journey yet. Most of them have been 20 plus weeks, since we only had this kind of the 7 topics. Here we are at the end of this. I don't remember what my next slide is, so I'm going to do that. So tonight, to wrap up, we do a couple things. I'm going to fill in some of the minor holidays. If you remember, our task to start out was based on Leviticus 23. That was the list that starts with the Sabbath and then goes through the year of the festivals God ordained, primarily around 3 pilgrimage festivals. The Feast of Unleavened Bread. And if you remember, we've got that right of this. Oh, I didn't do that. Never mind. We got that grouping in the first part of the year. Unleavened bread, Passover, first fruits. And then weeks is the next pilgrimage festival, 50 days later. And then the last grouping here in the fall, within 15 days, the 1st of Tishri through the 15th of Tishri, Rosh Hashanah, or trumpets to tabernacles. Those are the ones that chapter goes through. So tonight we're going to fill in a couple of things based upon this. If you remember, if we did our journey through the Hebrew Bible, we talked about the 5 scrolls, or the Hamesh Megalot, which Megalot just means scrolls and 5. These are called the 5 scrolls because these are 5 books that are part of the writings, the Torah, the prophets, the writings, so the last section of the Hebrew Bible, that correspond to observances for Israel. 3 of them are covered so far in our Leviticus 23, and that's the Song of Songs, which is connected to Passover. Now, I pulled out my notes because when I saw that, I'm like, really? Song of Songs and Passover? That seems kind of odd because, Song of Songs is very kind of romantic imagery, love imagery. But the idea behind that is something to do with God's love for his people, rescuing, seeking out his people, bringing them out on the Passover. The book of Ruth is associated with Shavuot, which is which one? Here's your pop quiz. Since I'm giving you the Hebrew word. That would be the Feast of Pentecost or Weeks. If you remember, that became the time when the people of Israel celebrated. It became associated with the giving of the law on Sinai. Originally, in Exodus, it wasn't connected to that, but tradition sort of put those 2 things together, and there are reasons in the narrative that it's about 50 days from Passover when they're liberated until the until the Feast of Weeks. And I bet this thing just flipped. Sorry. I got that pop up again for our online friends. Hopefully we're back. Yes, no.
Yeah, so. You didn't go away.
Okay. The last time that thing popped up, I did. So here we are. So Ruth is associated with that. And again, that seems like an odd association. What does Ruth have to do with Passover, Pentecost, excuse me. And part of what the idea is Ruth is a Moabitess that is brought into the people of Israel, that becomes a daughter of the commandment, a bat mitzvah, who commits herself, and the idea that the law is God adopting or bringing in what was not a people, just a group of ragtag, at this point, former slaves that are out in the middle of nowhere. So that becomes the connection there. The 4th one on the list, Sukkot, which is, I'm sorry, booths or tabernacles, the last of the festivals. Ecclesiastes got to be associated with that and is read as part of the celebration of that week-long holiday. So you have these connections. Now we have in this 5 scrolls, there are 2 others that also are associated with holidays. One is biblical, one is not. And so the more biblical of them is Purim, which is associated with the story of Esther. And the one that is, we'll talk about this in a few minutes, Tisha B'Av is associated with, it's the saddest day of the Jewish year. And that explains the association with Lamentations, lamenting things that are wrong. But let's talk about this first of the more biblical ones, Purim. the word literally means lots, which is an odd thing. Why would a festival be named lots? And lots as in casting lots. And that's because in the story of Esther, what we have is this particular, is the next to last chapter, chapter 9. So the Jews agreed to continue the celebration they had begun, doing what Mordecai had written to them. For Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them and had cast the lot, that is the lot, for their ruin and destruction. But when the plot came to the king's attention, he issued written orders that the evil scheme Haman had devised against the Jews should come back onto his own head, and that he and his son should be impaled on poles. How exciting. Therefore, these days were called Purim, from the word pure. So, probably kind of are vaguely familiar with the story of Esther, yes, but just in case, it's kind of a fascinating story, 10 chapters or so. Esther is the Assyrian Empire is where we're at. That this is happening kind of in exile. Esther, a Jewish young lady, somehow gains entrance to the harem of the king. The king gets mad at his queen Vashti because she tells him no, you don't tell the kingdom. And so she's out. And in the contest to win his love, Esther wins his love and becomes the new queen. But her uncle, Mordecai, is adamant you cannot tell him you're Jewish. Keep that a secret. Well, so that's the setup. Then Mordecai, being a good Jewish person, gets into trouble with a key official in the king's court, Haman. Because Haman kind of gets the big head, and he is thought to be worthy of the honor, and you're supposed to bow down to Haman. And Mordecai refuses to bow down to Haman. And that ticks Haman off. That's maybe not the most biblical way to put it, but he wanted to smite him. How's that for a better point? And so he goes to the king, and they kind of come up with a plan that we're going to take out this guy. And Mordecai decides that he's kind of negotiating and rigging things behind the system so that he can get Haman. And then beyond Haman, all of Haman's people, all of the Jews, he kind of implicates the whole nation. He doesn't bow because they're Jewish, they have a different religion. And so he's got it all going. Well, what has also happened is Mordecai, through Esther, warns the king of a plot and thwarts an attempt on the king's life. And it's recorded somewhere in the annals. And one night the king can't sleep, and he's up, and he asks to have the annals read to him, and they read them to him, and middle of the night, and he comes across this note of Mordecai and him being saved, and he says, have we ever done anything for Mordecai? And it turns out they've never done anything for Mordecai. Well, he wants to do something for Mordecai, and he looks out in the courtyard early in the morning, and there's a shadowy figure. He says, who's that? Bring him in here. It's Haman. Because Haman is about to hatch his plot. He's going to erect gallows outside and convince the king to kill him. He's going to be a big spectacle. He's going to have Mordecai killed as this great vengeful spectacle. Well, Haman comes in, and he thinks he's calling me in. All right, I'm going to get what I'm deserving. And he comes in, and what the king tells Haman is, listen, I just remembered Mordecai. I want you to go parade him around town and let everybody know of Mordecai's great deeds. Well, that really ticked off even more Haman. And so he's all upset. Well, as all of this is percolating, Mordecai knows Haman's got it out for him. And he thinks his only hope is Esther to do something to ask her husband, the king. And so he tells her, you've got to go into the king. She says, I can't just do that. I just can't walk into the king. I could be killed. And one of the more famous verses, isn't it possible that God had put you in this position for such a time as this? So she does. She goes in. The king extends his hand or club or whatever it is, invites her in. And she says, I have a request, but I'll tell you at a banquet. She throws a banquet. Everybody comes. Mordecai and Haman are there. The first banquet goes by. She says, I'll tell you tomorrow. We'll have another banquet. Have another banquet. She kind of, on the second day of the banquet, rolls out all of the stuff that's going on that Haman is plotting against Mordecai and the Jews. And if that happens, there's actually been an order signed by the king that they can be killed. And if that happens, that means I, your wife, am going to have to be killed too. And the king says, well, I can't do anything about that because I've made the order, but I'll make another order and say the Jews can defend themselves. They have the right to fight back. And they do, and actually they win this remarkable victory over the people that are trying to do them harm. And at the end, as you see here, Haman gets his comeuppance as he is, the gallows that are outside for Mordecai are used for Haman. It's quite the story. You know, one of the most remarkable parts about the book of Esther is, little trivia, it never mentions God. God is nowhere mentioned in the entire book. Now, the undercurrent, because these are Jews, these are God's people, but they're in exile, is there. And in fact, later, there were additions made to Esther that are more explicit about God, but there's scholars are like, no, those are definite later additions. Those were not originally in the story of Esther. And so out of this story that never mentions God, now I'm not making a big point of that, saying it shouldn't be in the Bible or anything, but it's just kind of an interesting little side note to the book, comes this festival. And we see in the verses just before this, that Mordecai recorded these events and he sent letters to all the Jews throughout the province of King Xerxes, near and far, to have them celebrate annually the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar, as the time when the Jews got relief from their enemies, and as the month when their sorrow was turned into joy and their mourning into a day of celebration. He wrote them to observe the days as days of feasting and joy and giving presents of food to one another and gifts to the poor. So, how do Jews today celebrate Purim? They read Esther. They give monetary gifts to at least two poor people. They send gifts of food to at least one person, and they have a festive feast, which includes wine and other intoxicating beverages. Just for the record, no surprise there. So this Esther passage in the next chapter, last chapter, kind of praises Mordecai. But these two verses tell us the day. It's the 14th and 15th of Adar, and it tells us the way, even to this day, it's observed. So we got to add something to our calendar. Purim. Now, here we are. We're at the end of the year. Nisan, at least the religious year, the first day. So this is the 14th and 15th, about halfway through the month of Adar. You know, I should have looked this up because Adar is the one that on leap years they have first and second Adar, and I don't know what they do with Purim, if they put it first or second. But nonetheless, we can see it's kind of a spring holiday as we compare to our calendar. So it is biblical. It has biblical kind of precedent, but it's not prescribed as part of the law. It's an Assyrian captivity. King Xerxes, as you saw, or Ashurasis, as some translations say. So we're much later in history of Israel. We're in exile, and this story comes about and adds to their calendar. Any questions, by the way? Thoughts, comments? Story of Esther is actually quite fascinating in many ways. It's a fun little read. There's some debate as to whether it's kind of a fictional account that somebody made up to throw it in there. But even in Esther itself, there is a point where it says, you can read about all these things in the annals of these kings. So it purports in and of itself to be a historical account of what happened. And so I'm going to take it at that. But it's a fascinating little story. The fifth of those 5 scrolls, Lamentations, points us to this holiday, Tisha B'Av. It's the one that's named after a month, the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av. There, did I do that? Let me go back here. So Av is the 5th month of the year. That'll be important as we read some. So we're here somewhere between Pentecost and the fall, the Jewish New Year. For Tisha B'Av, as I said, it's the saddest day of the year. One of the places that this connection is made, I think this is in 2 Kings, on the 7th day of the 5th month. So 5th month of 7th day, even though Tisha means 9, 7th day of the 5th month. In the 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, then commander of the imperial guard and official of the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem. He set fire to the temple of the Lord, the royal palace, and all the houses of Jerusalem. Every important building he burned down. So this is 586 BC, the Babylonian captivity, which was in 3 waves. But here's Nebuchadnezzar's army making it to Jerusalem. And in the 5th month, in this case, on the 7th day of the 5th month, they set fire to the temple of the Lord and all the houses and every important building. What is this? Jeremiah the prophet also has this to say. He says it's on the 10th day of the 5th month in the 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar, commander of the imperial guard, who served the king of Babylon. It's kind of the same story. He set fire to the temple of the Lord, the royal palace, all the important buildings, and every important building he burned down. But he's got it on the 10th day. So was it the 7th or the 10th? They said, let's make it the 9th. I don't know what. So neither of these biblical records say the 9th. But some tradition leans more heavily toward Jeremiah, and they say that this idea of the 10th day was the fire burned into the 10th day of the month, not that it was necessarily started. And so that's part of what goes into thinking that. So you could see how this temple that was the status symbol of their relationship with God being burned is pretty sad for them. But throughout their history, they have attached other events also to the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av. Some of them, the earliest, this is not recorded as a date in Numbers 13. The story is in Numbers 13, but nowhere does it indicate the date. Okay, so this is, maybe we'd say, more traditional. In 1313 BC, the spies that are sent to spy out the land come back and make their report, where the 10 vote no and the 2, Joshua and Caleb, say yes. And so that starts, because of their unwillingness to enter the land, their 40 years in the wilderness. So that would be a sad day. Not only do they say the first temple was destroyed on Tisha B'Av, but the second temple in 70 AD, they cite the 9th of Av as the day that Rome comes in and destroys the temple. And then the very next year, 71 AD, Rome kind of comes back and sort of raises whatever's left of any, kind of takes, the ruins of the temple and just smashes it all down, except for the Western Wall, apparently, in 71, also on the 9th of Av. And then we get fast forward into history as we think about anti-Semitism that has been throughout history. The Jews are expelled, they believe, from England in 1290 on the 9th of Av, from Spain in 1492. That seems like an important date. I think I've heard that somewhere. And from Vienna, Austria in 1670. We actually went to Savannah for our anniversary last year and went to what was one of the oldest Jewish synagogues in the U.S. They do a tour there. And the tour is actually not a tour. It's come sit in our auditorium and we'll tell you the history. And I didn't realize that, they talked about not just were they expelled from Spain, but as the Jews went from England to Spain and they were expelled, they went to Portugal. And a few years later, they were expelled out of Portugal. Apparently that wasn't on the 9th of Av. So it's the record. And many of you know Janet Lescaliti. Her family, her dad is from Egypt, Jewish descent, but they have family that are connected that were in Portugal when the Jewish people were expelled from Portugal. And what Portugal has done is offered citizenship to any that can trace their lineage to Jews that were in Portugal when that happened. And she has taken up on that. She's going through the process. I don't know if she's completed or not, but she will be recognized as a citizen of Portugal because of what happened all those years ago, late 1400s,
Was that when
early 1500s.
the Iranians or Muslims were trying to take over Portugal and make it?
I should know that, but I don't remember. It would make sense
Yeah.
because the Middle Ages, the Crusades and all of that would be on the heels of that sort of thing. But yeah, so Portugal's on the list, but I think that's interesting. Fast forward to maybe more recent history. Again, I don't know. I didn't look and find out, but the final solution, this is the decree that the Germans made, was it Himmel made, that would provide for the eradication of the Jews, was authorized on 1940 on the 9th of Av, and the Treblinka death camp also opened the next year, 1941. These two are probably traceable, a little more so than these, but these would be things that I didn't look up. Maybe I should have. I just went with the Jewish website, Chabad.org is one, and Jews for Jesus talks about these, that when they talk about the saddest day of the year, Tisha B'Av, they point to all of this history from 1313 BC to less than 100 years ago, that tragedy has befallen the Jewish people. And they do that. If the day of Purim is a day of great feasting and joy, the day of Tisha B'Av is a day of great fasting and sorrow. In fact, the typical fast is a 24-hour fast, but for Tisha B'Av, they actually do 25 hours of fasting, because the burning of the temple, they thought that the temple in the 586 BC went into the night, the 10th day that Jeremiah says. That's their connection there. So they fast 1 extra hour to indicate that saddest day of the year. Again, there's some connection to that date in the Bible, but there's nowhere any prescription of this is what you should do to commemorate this particular tragedy that befell you. And of course, since we did Lamentations, we know it's such an encouraging book, such an uplifting read. So it would make sense that they would read it. I think I've read a couple of places that it's not just one time they read through Lamentations. It's not a long book. They read through it several times over the course of those 25 hours that they celebrate Tisha B'Av. And now let's add it to our calendar. We're over here. So we're filling in some blanks.
So in July and August of whatever year, all those events happened in a July or an August time frame.
That's, again, probably in more recent history, World War II history, we could find out those, and I don't know. I'm not conversant on that, but that's their.
Okay.
Now, where was that temple at? You mentioned it was the first temple in this country?
Jerusalem.
No, in this country.
The one I visited was in Savannah.
Oh, it was one of the first temples in
One of the oldest in the U.S.
Oldest in the U.S. Oh, in Savannah, Florida.
And they came from Portugal. The
Right,
first,
I heard that. I understood that part, but I just missed it where it was in this.
Yeah.
So it was in Savannah. Okay.
and there
You said around 1492.
that's when they were expelled from Spain. It was later that they were expelled from Portugal.
Oh, right. Okay. Interesting.
The other interesting thing about that oldest synagogue in Savannah is it looked like a Catholic church. It was
Really?
it was a cross. You had the organ behind you. You had the raised like balcony. It had an altar kind of. It looked like I was in a Catholic church. What in the world? It's not the original synagogue they built, but apparently the architecture is beautiful. I forget which period it's from, but there was this big push of that kind of architecture, particularly around churches, and somehow they, at their synagogue, got in on it, and they have a wonderful example of stained glass windows, Catholic church, just Jewish windows. It's really didn't make a lot of sense to me.
Still being used now for the Jewish people.
They're still meeting there, yes.
They still be.
Yeah. Excuse me, somebody's here. Can we help you?
Yeah, here's the day. So it's called the Bible study for men.
Oh,
Yes, apparently it's on Thursday.
it was Wednesday.
So I did there.
All right. Yeah, so it's still active, still going. But yeah, connects way back to that particular, those first refugees that came.
Well, that's what, 500 years?
A few years back.
92 years with Columbus.
When Columbus sailed the ocean blue, as
Well,
the rhyme goes.
yeah, we know this. The Vikings guy here first, but Columbus is, but
Minor details.
Did he bring the juice over?
Columbus, I don't think so.
they wandered over after what, like everybody else did after Columbus.
They were looking for the gold,
We're
the
looking for
spices.
the lack of persecution. Most of them, they were getting beat out.
Exactly, look, it's easy that.
Yeah,
They
they
believe.
get beat up ever since they built the pyramids. Poor you, see, they shape on them.
All right, so last but not least, you may know this guy. Good old Hanukkah. Literally means dedication. Hanukkah is nowhere in the Bible. Well, I shouldn't say that. Hanukkah is nowhere in the Protestant Bible. If you have a Catholic Bible, you will have the Apocrypha. You will have the book of 1st and 2nd Maccabees, and you will learn in those books the story of Hanukkah. Quick, overview of the history. It's, let's see, what year? 168 BC.
How many days on?
We'll get there. Don't get ahead. Antiochus Epiphanes, the Syrian king, marches into Jerusalem and he desecrates the temple. By the way, Daniel talks about this in his prophetic, the four empires, that statue and all. It's referenced good old Antiochus Epiphanes, the Seleucid ruler who comes in, desecrates the temple, turns it into it was actually renamed for Zeus, a Greek god. And there's a resistance to this movement led by the Maccabean family. Ironically, the name of one of them that's the hero is Judas, which usually isn't a kind of a Bible hero name. Or Judas Maccabeus is the military leader. They are severely outnumbered and yet are able to, and in the story, miraculously win the battle that gets the Syrians out and gets them control of the temple. And so part of the thing they want to do is rededicate the temple that's been desecrated in the way Antiochus did and by being named for a foreign god. And so they do that. One of the problems is the supplies of the temple are lacking, particularly the legend, as it were, and I do say the word legend because nowhere in Maccabees is this story told. This is a later Talmudic addition to the tale of the Maccabees. That they find one small jar of oil with which to light the candles, and they do light the candles, but miraculously, they send off to get more oil. It takes 8 days for the oil to get there, and this little jar of oil miraculously should have only been for a day, lasts the entire 8 days until the new oil comes, and this becomes the kind of the legend around Hanukkah. And the most visible symbol of Hanukkah, of course, is the 9-stemmed menorah. Now, if you read Old Testament temple menorah, it does not have 9 candles. So if you look at a menorah, it has 9. That's not a temple menorah. That's a Hanukkah menorah. If you look at a menorah, it has 7. That, which you would know, 7 kind of is an important number in the whole biblical scheme of things. A 7-branch menorah is the temple or the more religious menorah. The 9-branch menorah is the one that represents Hanukkah. The reason it has 9 is because the middle candle is the one that's always lit and is used to light the other candles with. So we were there in December because that's our anniversary with. And of course, outside that wonderful Jewish synagogue was the menorah. And I forget how many days we were into Hanukkah at the time. We may have been a little after Hanukkah and they were all lit. And then there's this fascinating history, at least it is to me, so I get to share it since I found it. There was a debate in how do we commemorate this? And obviously the lighting of the candles is very important to Hanukkah celebrations even today. And there were a couple of rabbis that began to duke it out. One of them is the one you may have heard of, good old Hillel, and the other is Shammai. These 2 rabbis duked it out over a lot of things. And as it pertained to Hanukkah, Shammai thought to light the candles, the first day, let's light all 8. And then the second day we'll light 7, the third day 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. So the last day we light 1, because at his point, the fact that the oil lasted, let's show that. Hillel said, no, the greatest miracle is on the 8th day. So let's light 1 on the first day, 2 on the second, 3 on the third. Now, if you've been around menorahs, you know Hillel won that battle. And so there it is. The scripture that came to be associated with Hanukkah that's still typically read is Psalm chapter 30. And the reason is Hanukkah is celebrated on the 25th day of Kislev. And there are 5 books in the Torah, and 25 plus 5 equals 30. And Psalm 30 is often known as the song of the dedication of the house. Obviously, the dedication of the temple being in mind there. We've got, let me just go there real quick. I didn't have it marked. A song for the dedication of the temple of David. So not the one in the 2nd century BC, but the original temple. So they use Psalm 30 as part of the celebration of that. That's the only connection that we have to like the scriptures. There's no instruction. There are some that say there may be hints that Jesus in some of his some of the gospel accounts may have been there may have been around Jerusalem at Hanukkah, or may have celebrated Hanukkah. It's not explicit in any way. So don't have any of that to go. Hanukkah, as we just learned, is in the 25th of Kislev, which we know kind of, it can go anywhere from, I think, November 28th to, I think I wrote it down. The range is November 28th to December 27th. And that's the earliest to the latest it can be. And again, why is it always moving around? Because lunar calendar versus our solar calendar. So you see it fills out our circle a little bit more.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You said something about that menorah is over 9.
Right.
And then you said there's one that has 7. You know, what is that?
So if we go back to the law, as part of what they were to put in the temple is a candelabra, and that's described with 7. So the law, the decoration of the temple menorah has 7 branches. And then, like when we talked about the Feast of Tabernacles, they put lights up in the courtyard. Those only have 4. So they just make stuff up. How many do we need today? No, but 7 is the temple menorah. 9 is the Hanukkah, often called. Fascinating stuff. At least somewhat. So we're thinking about where we are. We're usually aware of Passover, A, because we often talk about it in church world, and B, because it's around Easter. And we're probably more aware of Hanukkah because it's typically around Christmas. So we're in that. The others, I don't know if they register very much on our radar. There's some liturgical churches that Pentecost is a big day. That's 50 days after that they would celebrate that. Mention it and the coming of the Spirit. But really, of all of the holidays, those are the only 2 that kind of catch our attention on a regular basis. And so I wanted to kind of wrap up, not just by saying, oh, here are 3 more holidays, but by looking at Isaiah chapter 1. Because religion is a funny thing, isn't it? These are we spent the last 11 weeks and a little bit today talking about ways that this people that we call the Jewish people celebrate or commemorate their relationship with God through various festivals. Even the unbiblical one is in their mind a celebration of God's miraculous intervention for them to retake the temple. So why not be quoted as an undercurrent of their faith? And Isaiah writes at a time when the northern kingdom is messing around and is about to be taken into exile. And as a prophet, it's his job to warn them. And we're, chapter 1 here, right? We're right at the beginning. What's one of his first messages? Verse 10, hear the word of the Lord, you rulers of Sodom. Listen to the instruction of our God, you people of Gomorrah. If you want to get Israel's attention and you want to call them a name, those are 2 good names to call, right? And it's really a remarkable thing because Isaiah is saying this point in your history in the Genesis account that marks the lowest point of moral decay, where God intervened and destroyed these 2 cities, you are no different than them. It's not a nice thing to say to God's people. And then he goes on and says, the multitude of your sacrifices, what are they to me, says the Lord? I have more than enough of burnt offerings, of rams and the fat of fattened animals. I have no pleasure in the blood of bulls and lambs and goats. As we've gone through this, remember all the times we talked about just the numerous animals at various times that they sacrificed, prescribed by God in the law. They didn't make this up. They're like, oh, if we can sacrifice 1 bull, that must be good. So let's do 10. That'll be even more. No, these are things God said. I want you to sacrifice these animals. And here, through the prophet, he says, I've had enough. The burnt offerings, the fat offerings, you read in the law that they take the kidneys and the fat of the kidneys and the liver, and they would burn that as a special offering to God. And the blood of bulls and lambs and goats. When you come to appear before me, who has asked this of you, this trampling of my courts? Stop bringing meaningless offerings. Your incense is detestable to me. New moons, Sabbaths, convocations. I cannot bear your worthless assemblies. Your new moon feasts and the appointed festivals, that's the ones we've talked about, I hate with all my being. They have become a burden to me. I am weary of bearing them. When you spread out your hands in prayer, I hide my eyes from you. Even when you offer many prayers, I am not listening. That's harsh. And those words that Isaiah speaks on behalf of God, the quotation marks, this thus says the Lord kind of a stuff, in reference to the entirety of their religious life, and particularly to things like the Sabbath and the new moon, which we talked about. The Sabbath, that starts Leviticus 23. New moon, we kind of hint at for this and that. And then the festivals, the feast days, those 7 holidays that he prescribed. God says, well, what did he say in the verse before? I hate with all my being. They have become a burden to me. I am weary of bearing them. These that were meant for the people of God to be reminders, a source, Passover. Which I want you to remember that you were slaves in Egypt and I brought you out. And I'm going to give you this law to follow. And part of the law is like, because you know what it's like, make sure as you live in the land, you treat others that are strangers and foreigners in the same way that you were treated. And I'm giving you the law, like the Festival of Weeks. I gave you my law. I gave it to you after. I didn't give it to you as a condition for me to rescue you. I rescued you. And then out of that relationship, I said, here is the law. And then in the trumpets and the Day of Atonement, I know that you're not perfect, but I've given you a means to atone for that. And I've blessed you in a land flowing with milk and honey. Those spies we talked about carrying a single bunch of grapes on a pole between 2 men. Blessed with all that. And all of this is meant to recall that to your mind. And they have become a burden to me. I hate them. Here we are. We're not Jewish. We don't keep these festivals, but do we have a few things that we keep in our religious calendar? Yeah. And I wonder sometimes if God doesn't look down at us and have these same thoughts, because why? Well, maybe just like the people of Israel, easy to go through the motions. oh, I'm supposed to do this, I can do that. I'm supposed to bring a bull or a goat or 5 bulls or 5, I can do that, no problem. I'll pay the penance that you're asking, as long as you don't require anything of me. As long as, it's almost as if people throughout history, including his chosen people, and right up to today, have used religion to keep God at arm's length. I'll do these things, God, but I'll do that on these days, but let me be over here. And the prophet, I thought, was a good reminder for us to end with. Because ultimately, while our feast days are different, while our festivals are different, while our observances are a little different, well, I love Christmas Eve candlelight service. I love it. It's one of my 2 favorite services of the year, Christmas Eve candlelight and Easter sunrise. Love them. 2 favorites. I get up early, so that doesn't bother me. I don't like to stay up late, so the sunrise, the candlelight sometimes gets to me. But nonetheless, those are great observances. And they're usually the 2 most well-attended services at any church every year. And I wonder if, as God looks down at packed churches on Christmas and Easter, on Christmas Eve and Easter morning, these thoughts don't crop up sometimes. And it reminds me, I can get in the same old going through the motions habits that I forget. That what God did for Israel, again, to what I said a minute ago, he did it not to say, hey, if you do these things, I'll rescue you. He did it after he already rescued. And he said, here's who I am to you. And here's what I ask of you. And part of it, I'm going to let you party. I'm going to let you celebrate. My goodness. How easy it is to go through the motions. We said in one of the early weeks, the last verse of our class, and then we'll be done a little bit early. Chronicles 2:16 and 17. Therefore, Paul writes, let no one pass a judgment on you in questions of food or drink, or with regard to a festival or a new moon or a Sabbath. Because that was happening. This was obviously a problem. It's always been a problem. It's a problem in church world to this day. That I think you should do this or that or the other a certain way. And if you don't do it that way, I'm going to look down on you. These are a shadow. The substance, the reality belongs to Christ. All that we've talked about, all of these festivals, God didn't give just for Israel to go through the motions to keep him happy. They lived in an ancient Near Eastern world that the view of the gods is if you just throw them a bone every now and then, or a virgin in a volcano every now and then, it'll be great. He'll send the rain. He'll make you fertile. He'll provide whatever. And when we treat those things like that, whether it's as the people of God in Israel did and do, or as we as Christians do, we miss what really matters. We miss the substance. And I think the whole point of the feast, as I've said before, wasn't an end in themselves, but they were directional. They were big flashing arrows pointing to something else. And when Jesus came along and we walked through a lot of these festivals and how he fulfilled them and how he observed them, it should have been, hey, this is it. This is what we've been waiting for. But when we empty those things of meaning where they become rote, we miss what's really underneath. My prayer is that I don't get there. My prayer is that every Christmas Eve, when the lights go down and the candles are lit, there'll still be that thing inside of me. It goes, not, oh, how pretty. What has God done? And when we stand on the beach and you just watch the sunset and stop listening because it just peeked over the water behind me, and I turn around and take a minute. want everyone to lose that sense of wonder and awe that God has done something new. And the sunset, not just Easter morning, but every morning is a reminder. His mercies are it's out of Lamentations, I think, of all places. And so I hope as we've done this, it hasn't just been a little history lesson, because it has been some of that. But may it be for all of us an encouragement to grab onto the substance that is under whatever it is of our religious life that we can let devolve into ritual and habit instead of life and relationship. And that is our wrap up. What you got? Thoughts, comments, questions?
Well, we know Easter sunrise, what we're there for. I don't think people come to that and get up that early just because they're supposed to. Or it's a holiday or something. But to me, it reminds me of Veterans Day. It's a day off.
Right.
It's a day off. That's not the purpose. It's to remember these people. I feel like those two important days you're talking about, it's for that, they come because of that purpose, and I think they feel it. I think people are gonna bother and come to those two just to say, well, I did it because, I don't know, I should got some relatives are just
Trying to placate you.
yeah.
Back
Show up, so I'm showing up because she said so, not because I feel it, but most part, those two, I think can feel the purpose in their heart.
I hope so.
A lot of the other holidays, it's a holiday, it's a day off, it's, we get to drink and eat and party or whatever.
Whatever we do.
What is why we would do that, aren't we?
Hey, Snow Cone's cotton candy, hot dogs, good healthy stuff. Yeah, I mean, you hope. But I guess true confessions of a preacher, some days I'm like, is it Sunday already?
Yeah.
There's some, I mean, it's like, okay, I just gotta get through till 10:15, and then I can go sit down and I got another week before I have to worry about it again. And maybe I'm talking about me more than I'm talking about anybody else at times, with some of this stuff. It's a reminder to me, especially Isaiah's words, to don't take it for granted. Every one of those holidays on the Jewish calendar came at great cost, some way, and were the result of great faith. And Easter and Christmas came at great cost and came out of great love and are inviting us to great faith. I don't want to miss that. I'm glad to hear you are. All right. Shall we call it a journey? Okay. And I will pray. Be done for tonight. Father in heaven, we thank you for what you have done in history, even as we've gone through these festivals, these celebrations of your people Israel, each of them pointing to a way that you acted on their behalf in sometimes miraculous and remarkable ways to show your love and grace, to extend your relationship to them. Father, may we allow that to remind us of the lengths you have gone to for us through Jesus, who fulfilled all of these that were but shadows of the substance that was his life and death and resurrection. Father, give us a greater appreciation each day of who he is and what he has done. Lord, help us to fulfill that great commandment, to fall more in love with our heart, soul, mind, and strength, with our God, who is so good and so gracious to us. Lord, we pray as we finish up tonight and go to our homes that you would protect us, you would keep us safe. Lord, you would use us ultimately for your glory, to share the hope that we have, to share the faith that has changed our lives in ways when we interact with family and friends and neighbors and acquaintances. Lord, so that your kingdom might grow, people might come to know the goodness and graciousness of our great God. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.